The Fantastic Four is Marvel's first family, and they've been around for over 60 years. But how did Jonathan Hickman manage to take them to heights that they've never reached before? Woof. Hey guys, it's me Marcus, aka the Mad Dog, and we're back with another video. Written by Jonathan Hickman and illustrated by a who's who of Marvel artists, the first issue in this Fantastic Four run was published by Marvel Comics in August of 2009, with the writer leaving the title at issue 611 in October of 2011. And the dilemma of solving everything is one that Reed Richards can't avoid. Along with his superhero family, they'll have to deal with the politics of the Inhumans, an invasion from the negative zone, prophetic time travelers, and a council that's made entirely of interdimensional Reeds. But for a family that can overcome anything, what will they do when they lose more than they could ever predict? And with the weight of the world on his shoulders, will Reed learn that the thing that he loves most is also the thing that's holding him back? I'm not going to do a dedicated art section for this review, mostly because it varies wildly across this run, but by God was this one of the best series that Marvel's ever printed. I'm actually annoyed at myself that I didn't enjoy this as much as I should have done when I first read it. What's craziest and most evident to me is how Hickman managed to reinvent things and spice them up without needing to completely change who these characters are, for the most part. But right out of the gate, this had the perfect blend of sci-fi action and family adventure, and the early art from Dale Eaglesham complemented it well. It was big, bold and dynamic, but clean and easy to follow, with a hint of something that reminded me of Jack Kirby. In fact, the whole start of this run felt like a homage to 60s comics, and I'm not sure if that was intentional, because it was just a great collection of wacky, out there sci-fi stories that featured an array of unique characters. It was already clear that Hickman was planting some seeds that would pay off later on in the run, some of them in the very first issue that only cashed out in the finale, but for the most part it felt like it was just trying to restore a sense of fun and whimsy for the Fantastic Four, and I loved that. Of course, it does mean that some stories read better than others, like the Impossible Man story was one that I thought I would enjoy, but I just wasn't too keen on it. But the best part was that even during those parts that I wasn't too fond of, it was still adding to the dynamic of this family, and that was integral in the first half of this run. For as much as I hate kids, seeing Val and Franklin hanging out with their uncle was just nice, and for as much as I love a good action-packed series, Fantastic Four is about family, probably more so than Fast and Furious. Why did the initials always have to be FF? So having those moments solidified what's most important to this team, which is easy to forget when you're dealing with your Doctor Dooms and your Mole Men and your Galactuses. Speaking of which, the villains showed up for this run, and each one really made an impact when they appeared. It felt like Hickman must have had a bucket list of everything that he wanted to include before his time on this title was up, and I can't imagine that there was much left off that list. My only sort of gripe is that none of these villains ever felt like they were the true antagonist of this story, and to some people reading this that might feel like a positive, but it just felt like something was missing for me. But it also meant that some of the more famous villains only appeared for an issue or two, they said the piece, shook hands with Reed, and then left. There are clear storylines that continue throughout this run, but sometimes I just wish that there was a real continuing rival for Reed to butt heads with. Even Doom in this was more of a friend than an enemy. But I guess that's because the conflict of this series is established early on. It is about solving everything and having a contingency for the future, which is why a lot of the focus of this run also goes towards the Future Foundation. This was a concept that I really liked, and it wasn't something that just got mentioned once and then forgotten about. And when I thought back about the first time that I read this, they were an aspect of this series that I wasn't really too keen on. And sure, there's still a lot that they do that really irritates me, but it wasn't nearly as bad as I remembered. So yeah, let's jump into some of the storylines, and I probably won't touch on them all because some of them could only last for an issue, but starting this run off with the Council of Reeds was genius. And it's one of those concepts that makes you wonder why this didn't exist before, because when you think about it, this is the most Reed Richards idea of all time. And I actually liked how our Reed Richards was the newbie. For once, he wasn't the smartest man in the room, but at the same time, he was. And call this minor spoilers, but I wish we could have spent more time with the council and seen what they've done and what they plan to do, especially because early on it raised questions on if Reed should abandon his family for the greater good, but I felt we didn't get to see enough of the benefit to making that decision to know if it was one that he should go through with. And that's probably the only downside to having so much variety early on, that if there is something that you really enjoy, it might get ditched off for another storyline. And it's a shame because I felt like Hickman carried elements of this plot forward that probably weren't the most interesting, which is a bit of a disappointment because the council was a real highlight, and I can see now why Rick and Morty was inspired by it. And this next point might only be relevant to other dumb readers like myself, but I love the way that Hickman kept this intelligent without dumbing things down too much. And I've been trying to figure out how Hickman did that, and I think it's a combination of keeping explanations simple and also just avoiding too much jargon. You'll notice this a lot in real life, but when people are trying to convince you that they're smart, they will just use a lot of words. I just describe myself. But when I've read Fantastic Four before, they normally just make Reed say a load of sciencey things that sound intelligent, but they give you no understanding. But Hickman found a way to avoid that as much as possible, which is important when you've got a character that is smarter than anybody that's ever going to read the book. And on the slimmest of slim chances that Jonathan Hickman ever watches this video, thank you for that. But after that initial phase, I liked how each character had their own storyline to carry on with. It split the team up and highlighted their individual strengths, which I felt was important going into the 3-story arc. At this point, Steve Epting also took over the art duties of the series, which I felt was a good change because it was going into a more serious storyline, and he did have this more photorealistic, not as overly saturated, but more detailed look. And overall, I liked his style. I didn't think it was as good as the work that he did on Captain America, but I do have to ask, what on earth was his problem with Johnny? He went from male model to middle-aged man in the blink of an eye. Don't get me wrong, Epting's still great, which is part of the reason why I think his Johnny is just so bizarre. But I am fully under the belief, and nobody's going to convince me otherwise, that Epting had some kind of agenda against Johnny. But especially when it came to the intergalactic stuff, Epting really excelled. And although I like his style, I've never really followed his career. So seeing the difference between this and his work on Captain America was nice, and it showcased more of his range. But yeah, the multiple storylines really helped to flesh out just how far of a reach the Fantastic Four have had over the years. If anything, this run works really well as a catch-up to anybody that hasn't read Fantastic Four since the Lee and Kirby era. In particular, I really like seeing Ben go through this transition where he got 1 week where he could be a human, and just how much that meant to him. It was such a beautiful storyline, and I wish it could have continued more. And I just really enjoyed seeing Sue be the ambassador to Atlantis. She often feels like the character that gets completely overlooked, especially by Reed. And I can't lie, she deserves a dude that's gonna give her a little bit more attention, and if Namor's gonna be that guy, well, you know, I can't really blame you. But I was especially impressed with how well Hickman managed to balance all those plots together without one ever feeling like it was completely taken over, which despite my problems with it was something that was evident during East of West. But looking back on Fantastic Four, I can't think of any storyline that didn't really come to fruition, even if maybe the execution of some of them wasn't as good as I'd hoped. And that brings me on to some of the not so great elements of this run. Probably personal preference, but I wasn't a massive fan of the Inhuman stuff. I like that part of the Marvel Universe and Black Bolt, but here it just more felt like the black sheep. Especially when there were already so many great storylines going on, this one really felt like a drag and that it was taking way too long to say what it wanted to. What's worse is that they derailed the momentum of one of the best storylines in FF so that they could give Black Bolt some kind of weird exposition issue. Why do so many series enjoy doing this and always seem to pick the worst moment? Is getting an explanation for something supposed to get me more amped than the thing that I'm already gassed for? And there were also a handful of moments where it felt like there was a great jumping off point for this plot, but it just kept going, kinda like one of my videos. And if I could cut one thing out of this run, well, it'd be the gimmick that I'm gonna have to leave until the spoiler section, but this would be a close second. And when I did me where to start for the Fantastic Four, I made sure to include Jonathan Hickman, and that's a decision that I still stand by, but at a certain stage it feels like it just throws a ton of Fantastic Four lore at you with very little time to catch up. There would just be characters appearing that I only vaguely remembered, and it's only thanks to the fact that I read John Byrne's run that I knew who they were. Like, there's a She-Hulk now? I'm not being serious there. But on a real, it would just throw random elements in there, and because of the setup of this series, I wouldn't know how integral somebody might be, so it might be a bit of a hurdle if you're not already a massive Fantastic Four fan, but you should at least be fine for the entirety of the first omnibus, so it's a good job it's been reprinted, which you can already order with the discount codes that we've got with the channel sponsor, Organic Price Books. They've got great packaging, fast shipping, and amazing customer services, and if you use code WOOFWOOF, you'll get $2 off your order. And if you're ordering 3 or more books and you want them to be delivered together, make sure you use code WOOFWOOF, ship it together for 5% off your entire order. Don't worry, you can just copy and paste them from the description down below, and you can use these codes as many times as you like. And I remember when I did my video looking at the top 100 omnibuses as voted for on Reddit, I said that there was a dip in quality going into the second volume, and now I've reread it, I don't stand by that statement, but I do feel like a lot of the problems that I had with this run were highlighted there. I'm gonna try my best in this video to not spoil something that 90% of the people watching this probably already know, but something happens partway through this run which causes a vacancy to be available in the Fantastic Four, and the title also gets relaunched as FF. And I know I was only 15 at the time and pretty useless, but I at least would have liked an invite. And sure, I love the FF suits, but this whole ordeal felt completely pointless by the 12th issue with the relaunch. And the new member that joins is Spider-Man. Sorry if that's spoilers to anybody who hasn't seen the cover of the second omnibus in 10 years. And at first I felt this was the most logical pick, and not just putting Spider-Man on a cover so that you could boost your sales. He's an aerial based hero, he's great with science, he's quite young, so I was really excited to see where this could go until it pretty much just didn't mean anything. That's not Spidey's fault, it's more to do with how short-lived the whole thing was, but it's just so disappointing in a series that really seemed to respect the Fantastic Four and everything that they stood for, that they would end up doing something that just felt like a cheap gimmick. What's worse is that when Fantastic Four relaunched at issue 600, FF just felt like this skippable companion series, which is a shame too considering how balls to the wall it was at the beginning with all the Doom stuff and the good parts of the Black Bolt story. But once the two titles were running concurrently, it'd always be the case that the Fantastic Four were fending off some invasion and the kids are just running about a building, or the Fantastic Four will be dealing with disputes in Wakanda and the kids would just be running about with wildlife. And yeah, I know I'm never going to be the audience for a kid's storyline, and there were still some great issues after the relaunch, like the one where Peter and Johnny are living together is one of the best in this entire run, and if the negative zone election was FF, then that's pretty good evidence as well, but I just really struggled to connect with FF once Fantastic Four had launched back up, and unfortunately the main reason for that is probably the art. There were still a couple of styles I liked in the second half of FF, but for the most part it felt very second half of Immortal Iron Fist, if you catch my drift. And for some reason, and I can't remember who it was, I'm not going to name and shame here, but they just could not draw Val's face. I genuinely didn't know who she was supposed to be in certain scenes. And again, it just adds to what I'm saying, that when they had the two series, FF just felt like an afterthought, because it started off with Epting and Kitson doing a great job, but then it kind of just ditched all that off, and kept using them for the main series. Another thing that I really got my hopes up for as soon as I saw it was the appearance of Black Panther, and I loved how the majority of the storylines in this all revolved around characters that have now gone off on their own, but always had their origins with the Fantastic Four. But I wish this would have been thrown into the first half of the series and maybe been something that was explored a bit more. But unfortunately it just came way too late in the series for it to have that much of an impact. And if anything, it felt more like the wacky stories that we had to open this title, rather than the overarching, more serious plots that we were then following. And for a character like T'Challa, in a location like Wakanda, I felt like they just could have done more, especially since part of his storyline just felt like a Scooby-Doo episode. And although sometimes I complain about this, I do wish we could have had more moments of seeing this team interacting with other big figures within the Marvel universe. Yeah, I know Spider-Man literally joins the team and they do have a fight alongside the Avengers, but maybe do some magical mysticism with Doctor Strange. And actually wait, there was a really good Hulk issue, so I think basically what I'm saying is, the chess scene that we saw in the Invincible Iron Man, I just want to see the other half of that. And that argument probably doesn't make much sense when it comes to my next point, but the longer that this run went on, it did just become more about Reed than he did about the Fantastic Four. Again, he is the guy with the weight of the world on his shoulders, but it lost that balance that it had at the beginning, with each character having their own objective. They still had something that was going on, but it felt more like a side plot than it did the main thing. And if anything, it seemed like the series reminded itself of that, so it'd throw in an issue really quickly, which would be good, like the one where we see the Thing throughout time, but it would just be that one isolated issue and it wouldn't really carry forward with anything. And yeah, the Future Foundation still got a lot of time dedicated towards them, but they also had their own series. Whereas the Fantastic Four, besides the odd scene or issue here and there, really just became the Fantastic One the longer that the run went on. One sort of silver lining of that is that throughout this entire thing, it leaned into the narrative of Reed being a dick, but in this, at least to me, he wasn't an unlikable one. If anything, it's like Hickman wanted to evolve him from that and take him out of that stereotype. So it showed him making a more conscious effort to spend more time with his family, and it provided somewhat of an explanation as to why Reed is so distant, and it tied it into his own father and how he's at risk of doing the same thing. So by having so much focus on him, it did allow him to develop, and it was just nice that this wasn't two omnibuses of Reed telling Sue to shut up. And there's a debate that I seem to bring up in a lot of my reviews, but is it better to have a perfect ending but the middle to be a bit of a slog, or falter at the final hurdle but be great up to that point? And I'm bringing that up here because the ending to this run was really underwhelming. It's not even bad, it just doesn't feel like a conclusion. It sets up this big moment that's been foreshadowed from the first story arc, and then it just kind of gives up. It doesn't dampen the overall experience that I had, but with the level of quality that I'd seen throughout, I just really expected more. And sure, expectations do kill joy, but if you've been having a good time before that, why wouldn't you expect as much? And I guess I also can't talk about the ending without jumping into spoilers. This is your final spoiler warning, so if you don't want anything ruined, skip to the final verdict. And it feels weird including it in this section since the majority of people probably already know about it, but Johnny's death really meant nothing in the end. Don't get me wrong, his death scene and also the uncle storyline with Spider-Man were phenomenal, but Johnny was dead for less than a year. That's why my channel's been dead longer than that. By the time the death issue was released, I wouldn't be surprised if his return issue was already solicited. And I know, death in comics is this thing that we know just won't last, but once Johnny returned, I just found myself wondering what the point of it all was. Spider-Man kinda quietly dipped out of the team, and pretty much 2 issues after Johnny was back, nobody really mentioned this. I kinda feel sorry for all the kids in the Future Foundation, like, how are they gonna process this? Don't get me wrong, the Negative Zone storyline was cool, but they could have accomplished that without needing to kill Johnny off if all they were gonna do was revive him a few minutes later. And to me, the whole thing just felt like some kind of cheap gimmick, which this series really didn't need to do. It didn't need to sink to that level, and with the quality of writing, I can't imagine that sales were too bad. At least not to the point where they have to kill off a founding member just for the sake of it. The only silver lining is that by taking 25% of the original team away, you just realise how much they mean to each other. Like, sure, yeah, you can bring Spider-Man in, but he's no replacement for Johnny. But I felt like Hickman already did a good job of highlighting that just through some of the quieter moments of the team hanging out with each other. And it's a shame too, because the only things that I want to mention in this spoiler section are things that I didn't really like when I've spent the rest of this review gushing about the series. But the payoff to the Doom storyline at the end was a massive disappointment, especially because of the fact that they used this to close out the series and Doom was always in our peripheral. Hickman kept reminding us that Doom was here and that he had a plan and that there's already some kind of interdimensional army of other Dooms. And most of that played out outside of the issue and with very little impact on the main series. And I know Doom plays a bigger role in Secret Wars, which I've already mentioned I'm going to do for the season of events, but I can only judge the book that I've got in front of me and not how it was fleshed out in another series. And for a title that was so phenomenal for the majority of it, I can't tell you how disappointed I am with this Doom finale. And it's a shame because it means that this series finishes on such a flat note. It almost felt like there was supposed to be more issues and then it got cancelled and Hickman just had to cram everything that he wanted to with what he had left. And I find myself wondering, were the parts earlier on that maybe he could have fleshed this out, maybe done some more foreshadowing, and they had that great moment where Doom was working alongside the Fantastic Four and he also was plotting with Reed on how he could defeat a Reed. And if anything, I kind of wish they would have stuck with that instead of teasing this big finale that panned out to be nothing. This is my final verdict. And how do you leave a legacy on a series that's already been at the forefront of comics for over 60 years? I don't exactly know the answer to that. I'm an underachiever that's making videos in his spare bedroom, but by looking at Jonathan Hickman's run on Fantastic Four, it can certainly give us a good framework. With a great balance of science fiction, action, adventure, and family stories, Hickman crafted what should be used as the reference point for anybody that's tasked with writing Marvel's for his family and future. Although there are some plot points that don't reach the full potential, or feel like they stole the story somewhat, or in one case even just feel like a cheap gimmick, this is still one of the very best Marvel series that I've ever read. It was even better reading this a second time than it was the first, and some of the problems that I had with it were more to do with the drastic changes in art, and me just forcing myself to highlight things for the sake of this review. I do hope I enjoy revisiting his Avengers run as much as I did this one, because Fantastic Four by Jonathan Hickman comes with my highest recommendation. And if I did have to sum this up in one sentence, you should buy this in the best edition you can find because you'll want to keep this in your collection forever. So that's the video, hopefully you enjoyed it, but until next time, just make sure that you stay safe and stay mad all you dogs. Woof woof, see you at the next video.